The night air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of autumn leaves as Desmond Carter walked down the dimly lit sidewalk of Iron Heights. His boots pressed against the cracked pavement with a steady rhythm, his breath coming in even, controlled intervals. For Desmond, this was nothing more than a routine evening walk, a habit formed during his years in the military, where late-night patrols had trained him to find solace in the quiet. But here, in a city where justice was a privilege, not a right, the sight of a black man walking alone was enough to send whispers crawling through the neatly trimmed hedges of the wealthy suburban neighborhood. Suspicion was automatic. Guilt was assumed. And tonight, Desmond was about to become the next target of a broken system. "You look suspicious." The headlights of a squad car cut through the darkness like a predator locking onto its prey. The vehicle slowed to a crawl beside him, its engine humming with the subtle promise of confrontation. Desmond exhaled, keeping his posture relaxed, knowing exactly what was about to happen. The driver's side door swung open. A uniformed officer, Sergeant Bradley Hale, stepped out, his expression unreadable but his hand hovering a little too close to his holster. "Here we go again," Desmond thought. "Evening," the officer said, tilting his head as if assessing something invisible. "You lost?" Desmond didn't stop walking. "No, sir, just heading home." Hale fell into step beside him. "That's so?" "See, we got a call about a suspicious individual walking through this neighborhood, and well?" He let the words hang, his gaze sweeping over Desmond's broad frame, his dark skin, his mere existence in a place where he was not supposed to be. Desmond slowed to a stop. He had a choice to make. He could comply, shrink himself down, make this easier for them, or he could stand his ground. He chose the latter. "With all due respect, officer," Desmond said evenly, "since when is walking a crime?" The thin line between compliance and survival, Hale's expression flickered. Amusement? Annoyance? It was hard to tell. "You got ID?" he asked, his tone shifting slightly. Desmond narrowed his eyes. "Why would I need ID? I haven't done anything wrong." "Sir, I need to verify who you are." "On what grounds?" Hale's jaw tightened. The unsaid words between them were deafening. "I don't need a reason. I just need an excuse." From across the street, behind closed curtains, suburban eyes watched. No one spoke up. No one intervened. They never did. The air thickened with unspoken threats, with the weight of history repeating itself. Desmond could already see the headlines: "Man arrested for suspicious behavior while walking home." Trending, they literally arrested him for walking. The same story, over and over again. Desmond raised his hands slightly, not in surrender but in weary defiance. He had been trained for war, but this was a different kind of battlefield. "I'm not resisting," he said, his voice firm. "But I won't be bullied either." Hale smirked. He liked it when they resisted. "Let's see how that works out for you," he muttered, reaching for his radio. "I've got a suspect refusing to comply. Send backup." The sound of sirens. The sound of injustice. Desmond clenched his fists as another patrol car pulled up, lights flashing, sirens blaring as if he had committed an actual crime. He hadn't, but that didn't matter. Officer Rick Morales stepped out of the second car, a cocky grin stretching across his face. "What do we got here?" he asked, cracking his knuckles. "Guy thinks he doesn't have to answer questions," Hale replied. Morales scoffed. "That so?" He looked Desmond up and down. "Well, we got ways of fixing that." The street was silent. No one stopped them. No one intervened. The only sound was the click of a baton being extended. The handcuffs bit into Desmond's wrists, the cold steel a familiar weight he had felt once before, overseas in a war zone, during a mission gone wrong. But this wasn't combat. This wasn't justice. This was control. Officer Morales shoved him forward, his grip tight on Desmond's arm as he paraded him toward the back of the patrol car. A public display. A warning to anyone who dared exist where they weren't wanted. The neighborhood was quiet, except for the flashing red and blue lights staining the million-dollar houses. The curtain twitched from one of the pristine homes, but no one stepped outside. They never did. They just watched. They always watched. Resisting without resistance, Desmond didn't struggle. He didn't fight. He didn't flinch. He had been trained for moments like these, to stay calm, to assess, to wait. But even as he kept his body relaxed, Morales leaned in close, voice dripping with condescension. "Not so tough now, huh?" he whispered, his fingers digging into Desmond's shoulder, just hard enough to leave a bruise. Desmond turned his head slowly, locking eyes with him. He didn't say a word, but he didn't have to. The look was enough. A second later, Morales shoved him hard, making sure Desmond's head hit the doorframe as he was forced into the back seat. Cheap shot. Coward's move. He's resisting. The words hit the radio before Desmond could even react. Lies. They always had the perfect script, the one that justified whatever they did next. The script that turned them into heroes and men like him into statistics. The ride to nowhere. The patrol car pulled away, leaving behind the silent approval of the people who called them in the first place. Desmond stared out the window, breathing slow, letting the adrenaline settle. He had been in enough war zones to recognize a setup when he saw one. This wasn't just about him walking. This was about power. Because what was his real crime? Existing while black. Trending now, they literally arrested him for walking. Breaking, a massive lawsuit in the making. And still, the world outside kept moving. The city lights blurred past, cars zipped along, people laughed in bars and restaurants, as if nothing was happening. As if he wasn't shackled in the back of a squad car for a crime that didn't exist. As if this wasn't a scene that played out every single day. He had fought for this country. He had risked his life for the same people who now looked at him like he was the enemy. What a joke. Iron Heights PD, where the guilty go free and the innocent go missing. The car lurched to a stop, jerking Desmond forward as they arrived at the precinct. Morales yanked the door open and dragged him out, not bothering to be gentle. They walked him through the entrance like a trophy, past officers who didn't even look up. Because this was routine. A black man in cuffs? Just another Tuesday. The desk sergeant, an older man with dead eyes, glanced at Morales. "What we got," Morales grinned. "Disorderly conduct, resisting." Desmond laughed. He actually laughed, because of course. Of course, that's what they would call it. Because walking while black wasn't a charge they could put on paper. Stripped of everything. They took his fingerprints, his belongings, his belt, his shoelaces. Every piece of dignity they could rip away, they did. And then they threw him in a cell with no explanation, no phone call, no rights. Desmond sat on the cold metal bench, staring at the cracked ceiling, waiting. This wasn't just an arrest, it was a test. Would he break? Would he lash out? Would he become the angry black man they needed him to be? Or would he be something worse? Silent, calculating, patient. The cold from the metal bench had begun to seep into Desmond's bones, but he didn't move. He had been trained to endure worse. He had spent nights in the desert, waiting in absolute stillness for the enemy to make a mistake. And these men would make mistakes. They always did. No phone call, no lawyer, no charges. Iron Heights PD operated like a black hole. Once you were in, you didn't come out the same. Desmond had seen it before. Men left this place bruised, broken, or buried under false charges. Some didn't leave at all. Time stretches, but the game remains the same. The flickering fluorescent light above buzzed like a swarm of hornets. It was meant to irritate, to break men down. Desmond had read about the tactics: deprivation, isolation, psychological warfare. None of it worked on him. They had the wrong man. Hours passed, no food, no water. The shadows shifted as night bled into early morning. And then, the door creaked open. A heavy-set officer with tired eyes stepped in, clipboard in hand, badge reading, Lelton Carson. He walked with the confidence of a man who'd been doing this for years and gotten away with all of it. "Baker," Carson drawled, "you've got a mouth on you." Desmond stared, said nothing. Carson smirked. "Oh, now you're quiet? Thought you were a tough guy." Desmond leaned back, expression unreadable. He had learned a long time ago that silence was more powerful than words. Because silence forced weak men to fill the void. Carson sighed dramatically, flipping a page on his clipboard. "Says here you are acting suspicious. Lies. Says here you refuse to comply. Lies. Says here you are aggressive toward officers. More lies." Carson closed the clipboard with a snap and leaned in. "You're looking at obstruction, disorderly conduct, hell, maybe even resisting arrest." He tilted his head. "That's 3 strikes, Baker." Desmond's hands flexed. "You know damn well I didn't resist." Carson's smile was slow and cruel. "Doesn't matter what's true. The trade, a deal with the devil. Now look," Carson sighed, rubbing his temple as if this was all exhausting for him. "I could cut you loose, could let you walk." Desmond narrowed his eyes. "There was always a price. But," Carson continued, "I need to know something." Silence. Carson leaned in closer. Who are you working for? Desmond's heart kicked against his ribs, but his face remained blank. What? Carson tapped the clipboard. You're a military vet, a damn good one. Special forces, yeah? Desmond didn't answer. Carson nodded, as if confirming his own thoughts. You're not just some nobody walking through that neighborhood. That wasn't random. He paused, voice dropping lower. Who were you watching? They think I was casing a target. It hit him all at once. They weren't just arresting him for being black in the wrong place. They thought he was a threat, an assassin, a ghost, and now they needed a name. The moment of choice. This was where men cracked. They begged, they bargained, they gave names just to breathe free air again. Desmond? He just smiled. And then, he laughed. It was a slow, quiet laugh at first, the kind that made Carson's confidence falter. You think I was watching someone? Desmond asked, shaking his head. Carson's jaw tightened. What's so funny? Desmond leaned forward now, closing the space between them. His voice was low, controlled, lethal. If I was watching someone, you'd never know it. Silence. For the first time, Carson hesitated. Desmond saw it, the flicker of doubt, the brief moment where the predator started wondering if he had just walked into the cage instead. Good. Because this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The cell was suffocating, a space too small for the weight of what was happening. The air smelled of sweat and something stale, the kind of scent that clung to men who had sat in this place for too long, waiting for a justice that would never come. Desmond had seen it before, in war zones, in places where men with power decided who lived free and who rotted away. And now he was living it. He leaned against the cold cement wall, his muscles taut, his mind refusing to slow down. The game had changed the moment Carson asked who he was working for. That wasn't a random question. That was a man fishing for something deeper, something beneath the surface. They hadn't just arrested him because of the color of his skin or because some rich neighbors felt uneasy at the sight of him walking. They thought he was dangerous, and in a way, they were right, but not in the way they assumed. Footsteps echoed in the hall outside the holding cells. Desmond didn't lift his head. He had spent too many nights listening for the approach of footsteps, knowing when they belonged to men who meant harm. This man wasn't in a rush. He wasn't here to exert force. He was here for something else. The door opened, and a figure stepped in. Not Carson, not a uniform. This man wore a suit, sharp and pressed, the fabric barely creasing as he lowered himself onto the metal chair across from Desmond. There was no badge on his chest, no nameplate to identify him. But the air around him carried something worse than authority. It carried power. Power that didn't need to announce itself. Desmond finally looked up, and the man met his gaze with eyes as unreadable as the depths of the ocean. Mr. Baker, the man said, his voice smooth, calculated. Or should I say Sergeant Baker? Desmond's jaw clenched, but he didn't answer. The man smiled, but it wasn't warm. It was the kind of smile that belonged to men who knew secrets they were never supposed to have. I've been watching you for a while. He leaned back, studying Desmond like a puzzle waiting to be solved. You've been keeping yourself quiet, living low, but men like you don't just disappear. Desmond exhaled slowly, forcing his heartbeat to stay steady. I'm just a man walking through a neighborhood. The man tilted his head slightly. You and I both know that's not true. A silence stretched between them, thick and weighted. Then the man leaned in. Do you know why they arrested you? Desmond kept his face blank. Because they wanted to, he said. The man nodded, a small flicker of amusement in his eyes. Partly true, but there's something more, something bigger. He placed a file on the metal table, a thick file. Desmond didn't look at it, but he felt its presence like a loaded gun on the table between them. You were flagged, Baker. The man tapped the file. Before you even set foot in that neighborhood, before the first call was made, before that cop stepped out of his car. Desmond's fingers curled into fists against his thighs, his mind racing. They were waiting for you. The man's voice was calm, but there was something sharp beneath it, like a knife pressed just beneath the skin. This wasn't a routine stop. It wasn't just about control. Someone put your name on a list. Someone wanted to see what you would do when they boxed you in. Desmond stayed silent, but inside a storm was beginning to rise. This wasn't just about him. This wasn't just about some overzealous cops trying to assert their dominance. This was a test. And someone, somewhere, was watching the results. The man in the suit stood, straightening his jacket with a practiced motion. "You're going to be released soon," he said, "but don't mistake that for freedom." He took the file and tucked it under his arm. "You were on their radar before. Now you're under a microscope." Desmond met his gaze, steel against steel. "You should ask yourself one question," the man said, turning toward the door. "Who wants you off the board, and why?" The door clicked shut behind him, and Desmond was left alone in the suffocating silence of his cell. But now he wasn't just a man who had been arrested for walking down the street. He was a target, and someone, somewhere, had already decided what came next. The cell door swung open with an eerie creak, the sound of metal against metal sending a shiver down Desmond's spine. He didn't move at first, not because he didn't want to, but because he knew better. They wanted him to rush out to feel grateful, to believe that he had won something. But Desmond Baker wasn't the kind of man who mistook a temporary reprieve for victory. "Time to go," the guard muttered, not bothering to make eye contact. Desmond rose to his feet slowly, deliberately. His muscles were stiff from hours of sitting in that cramped space, his mind sharper than ever. He stepped out, his boots hitting the floor with a steady rhythm as he followed the officer down the dimly lit corridor. As he passed by the holding cells, he could feel the stares. Some were curious, others envious. Most were just tired. The kind of tired that settled deep into your bones when you realized the system wasn't broken. It was working exactly the way it was meant to. At the front desk, his belongings were shoved across the counter. His phone, his wallet, his keys. The officer behind the desk didn't say anything, just stared at him with that look. The one that said, "We both know why you were here. And we both know it won't be the last time." Desmond took his things without a word. He wouldn't give them the satisfaction. The moment he stepped outside, the air hit him differently. Crisp, cold, but thick with something invisible. A weight, a presence. They were watching. He didn't have to see them to know. His instincts, the ones he had honed on battlefields across the world, told him everything he needed to know. Someone was parked across the street. The same black sedan. No plates. The kind of car that blended in but was always there. Waiting, testing him. Desmond didn't react. He pulled his phone from his pocket and checked the time. A full day had passed since they snatched him off the street. In that time, the world had kept spinning. And yet, for him, everything had shifted. He had gone from a man trying to live his life to a man marked by unseen forces. And now, he needed answers. He started walking, not toward his truck, he wasn't that stupid, but toward the city, toward a place where he knew he could find information. The streets hummed with life, people moving, talking, existing. But Desmond wasn't just part of the crowd. He was a ghost slipping between them. Invisible, yet hyper-aware. The weight of the file the mystery man had shown him pressed against his mind. You were on their radar before. Now you're under a microscope. Oh? Why? And more importantly, what the hell did they want from him? His gut told him one thing. The arrest had been a setup. And if someone had gone through the trouble of setting him up, it meant they wanted to control him. Or erase him. Neither option was acceptable. As he cut through the streets, his phone buzzed in his pocket. A number he didn't recognize. He hesitated for a second before answering. Baker. A pause. Then, a woman's voice. Smooth, sharp, and carrying the weight of someone who had seen too much. You should have stayed off the board. Desmond stopped walking. His grip tightened around the phone. Who is this? Another pause. You don't have time for introductions. They've made their move. Now it's your turn. The line went dead. Desmond exhaled slowly, lowering the phone. He looked around, scanning the buildings, the people, the cars. Nothing. No signs of movement, no immediate threat. But the game had officially begun, and he was done playing defense. Desmond tightened his grip on the phone, his mind racing as he replayed the woman's words. You should have stayed off the board. Whoever she was, she knew something. And she wasn't calling to waste his time. The city buzzed around him, oblivious to the war that had just ignited inside his head. The sound of tires rolling over damp pavement, the distant hum of conversation, the occasional honk of a car horn, it all faded into background noise as Desmond forced himself to think. He had two choices. He could ignore the call, pretend like none of this was happening, try to slip back into his life and hope the people pulling the strings lost interest. Or he could lean in. Find them before they found him again. Desmond had never been good at playing the victim. His feet started moving before he had fully processed the decision. If someone had gone through the trouble of setting him up, they had left a trail, and he was going to follow it. He took a winding path through the city, cutting through side streets, alleys, anywhere he could move unseen. He had learned long ago that surveillance wasn't just about cameras, it was about patterns. If someone was tailing him, they wouldn't expect him to break his rhythm so fast. By the time he reached the small coffee shop on the outskirts of town, he was confident no one had followed, at least not yet. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of burnt espresso and the low hum of indie music playing over cheap speakers. The shop was nearly empty, save for a few scattered customers absorbed in their laptops. He made his way to the back, settling into the farthest booth where he could see the entrance. He pulled out his phone and did something he hadn't done in years. He dialed a number he had sworn he would never use again. The line rang once, twice, 3 times. Then a voice, gruff, tired, unmistakably familiar. "Baker." Desmond exhaled. "Yeah, it's me." A long pause, then a sigh. "Tell me you didn't do something stupid." Desmond glanced at the window, watching a car roll by slowly, its driver hidden behind tinted glass. "Not yet, but I need to know who's pulling the strings in Cook County." The man on the other end of the line chuckled darkly. "You really think you're the first black man they've tried to disappear around here?" Desmond's jaw clenched. He had expected corruption, but the ease in his friend's voice, the way he spoke as if this was just another day, this was routine. "I need names," Desmond said. "You need a plane ticket." Desmond smirked, shaking his head. "Not happening." Another pause. Then the sound of fingers tapping against a keyboard. "All right," his contact finally said, "but you didn't hear this from me." Desmond listened carefully as the information unfolded. Names, dates, connections, pieces of a puzzle that had been in play long before he stepped onto the board. And at the center of it all, the arrest hadn't been random. They were trying to send a message, but they had made a mistake. Desmond Baker wasn't the kind of man who ignored a challenge. He ended the call and leaned back in his seat, the weight of the moment settling over him. Then, for the first time since walking out of that police station, he smiled. It was time to go hunting. Desmond stared at the empty coffee cup in front of him, his mind racing through the information Baker had given him. The corruption in Cook County wasn't just a bad cop here and there. It was a system, a well-oiled machine built to exploit, silence, and discard people like him. The cops, the courts, the local government, it all ran on power, fear, and dirty money. And now, Desmond Baker was officially on their radar. He needed to move. Sliding out of the booth, he paid in cash and stepped back into the city's cold embrace. The night air had a sharp bite, but Desmond welcomed it. It kept him alert, kept him grounded. His first stop was a rundown law office on the south side, one of the few places that hadn't been swallowed by gentrification. The neon sign outside flickered weakly, barely illuminating the words "Hughes and Partners, Criminal Defense." Desmond had known Carter Hughes since they were kids. While Desmond had gone one way, military, private security, Carter had gone the other, fighting in the trenches of a system designed to break people like them. The moment Desmond stepped inside, Carter looked up from his desk, his expression shifting from tired indifference to wary concern. "Damn, Des, I heard what happened." Desmond shut the door behind him. "Then you already know why I'm here." Carter rubbed his temples. "Look, man, you don't want to go down this road." Desmond's stare was unwavering. "I'm already on it." A long silence stretched between them. Finally, Carter exhaled heavily, motioning for Desmond to sit. "I pulled your case," Carter said, reaching for a thick file on his desk. "Your arrest was bullshit, disorderly conduct, obstruction. None of it's going to hold up in court. But that's not the point, is it?" Desmond shook his head. "They weren't trying to charge me. They were testing me." Carter leaned forward. "You're right. And from what I've found, it goes higher than the cops who arrested you." He flipped open the file, revealing pages of documents, emails, and official reports. One name kept appearing: Deputy Chief Gerald Whitaker. "He's the one who ordered the stop," Carter said. "And he's dirty as hell." tied to private security contracts, real estate developers, even some big pharmaceutical money. Desmond narrowed his eyes. And he's got people cleaning up his messes. Carter nodded. You remember Malik Carter? Desmond's stomach tightened. Yeah. He got picked up last year. Same thing. Suspicious behavior in a rich neighborhood. 2 weeks later, he was dead in lockup. Official cause? Medical emergency. But I pulled the reports. That man was beaten to death. Desmond clenched his fists, and nothing happened. Carter's expression darkened. They made sure of it. The weight of the truth settled over them. This wasn't just about Desmond. It was about every black man who had been swallowed by the system and never heard from again. Desmond exhaled slowly, standing up. I need to find Whitaker. Carter shook his head. Des, don't do this. Desmond met his gaze. You know me better than that. Carter sighed. Then at least let me do my job. If you disappear, I need to make sure someone knows why. Desmond nodded. It was the closest thing to an agreement they were going to get. As he stepped back into the night, his next move was clear. Gerald Whitaker had played his hand. Now it was Desmond's turn. Desmond moved with purpose through the darkened streets of Chicago, his mind sharp with determination. The city had always been a battlefield, but now the war was personal. The injustice, the corruption. It had a name. Gerald Whitaker. And Desmond had spent his life dismantling threats. This one was no different. He made his way to an abandoned warehouse near the docks, a place where old deals were made and forgotten men were buried. It was the perfect meeting spot for someone like Michael Torres, an ex-detective turned fixer who had worked both sides of the law long enough to know where the bodies were buried. Desmond had saved his life once, back when Torres was still wearing a badge, and now it was time to cash in that debt. Torres was already waiting, leaning against a rusted shipping container, cigarette smoke curling around him. His sharp eyes flicked over Desmond as he approached. Hell, man, Torres muttered. You really don't know when to quit, do you? Desmond crossed his arms. Tell me about Whitaker. Torres exhaled, his expression tightening. You don't want to dance with that devil, Des. Desmond didn't blink. I already bought the ticket. Torres cursed under his breath. Fine, but once I tell you, you're on your own. He flicked his cigarette away and straightened. Whitaker ain't just some dirty cop, he's a gatekeeper. You think it's just police corruption? Nah, he's running protection for the kind of people who don't leave loose ends. Desmond's jaw clenched. Like who? Torres hesitated, then sighed. Developers, corporate security firms, even some government contracts. But the real money? It's coming from private prisons. Desmond's stomach twisted. He had seen the system chew up black men his whole life, but this was different. This was by design. Torres continued, his voice low. Whitaker's people push for more arrests, more convictions. You ever wonder why they go after guys like you? People who aren't criminals, but can still be turned into one. Desmond nodded slowly. Because the system needs bodies. Torres snapped his fingers. Exactly. They get quotas to fill, and once you're in, you ain't getting out. Desmond exhaled through his nose. So what happens to the ones who don't make it to trial? Torres went quiet. That was all the answer Desmond needed. They killed Malik Carter, Desmond said, his voice steady, and they'll do it again. Torres shifted uncomfortably. If you go after Whitaker, you better be ready. He's got a cleaner, a guy named Vincent Marks, ex-military, no conscience, and no leash. If Whitaker thinks you're a threat, Marks will find you first. Desmond smirked. Let him try. Torres shook his head. This ain't a fight you can win alone, Des. And if you go missing, no one's gonna come looking. Desmond took a step closer, his presence filling the space between them. Then I won't give them the chance. Torres studied him for a long moment, then reached into his jacket and pulled out a burner phone. I can't save you, but I can give you a head start. Whitaker's got a meeting tomorrow night at the Belmont Club. If you want to catch him in the act, that's your best shot. Desmond took the phone. Appreciate it. Torres sighed. You're gonna get yourself killed, man. Desmond's eyes were cold. Not before I burn this whole operation to the ground. As he walked away, he knew there was no turning back. The Belmont Club was more than just an exclusive establishment. It was a fortress. A playground for the wealthy, where corruption wasn't just tolerated, but expected. Deals were made over whiskey, Lives were destroyed over cigars, and men like Gerald Whitaker ensured that the real criminals never saw a courtroom. Desmond stood across the street watching the entrance. The bouncers were more than just muscle. They were trained. Whitaker wouldn't risk showing his face in a place that wasn't locked down tight. That meant armed guards, cameras, and, without a doubt, someone like Vincent Marks watching from the shadows. Desmond checked the burner phone Torres had given him. The text was short. 11 p.m., private room, second floor. He exhaled slowly. This wasn't just about catching Whitaker. It was about survival. He wasn't going in to start a fight, but if one started, he would finish it. 11 p.m., inside the Belmont Club. Desmond walked through the entrance like he belonged. He had stolen the suit, but it fit him well enough. The trick to blending in was confidence. Act like you own the place, and no one will question you. The club was a golden maze of decadence. Dim lighting, smooth jazz, and the low murmur of conversations built on secrets. Waiters moved like ghosts, carrying drinks to men who could ruin lives with the stroke of a pen. But Desmond wasn't here for them. He made his way upstairs, scanning for threats. Cameras in every corner. A guard at the top of the stairs watching the hallway leading to the private rooms. Desmond adjusted his cufflink, concealing the makeshift lockpick he had slid into his sleeve. The moment he was inside Whitaker's room, he would have seconds to act. He approached the guard. "Whitaker's expecting me." The man didn't blink. "Milne." Desmond didn't hesitate. "Torres sent me." The name was a gamble. The guard hesitated just a fraction of a second. That was all Desmond needed. He reached forward, subtly pressing a pressure point just beneath the guard's ribs. The man stiffened, his throat locking up in silent pain. Desmond caught his weight as he collapsed, lowering him gently to the floor before dragging him into an empty storage closet. No alarms. So far, so good. Inside the room, Whitaker sat at the head of a mahogany table, a glass of bourbon in one hand, his other lazily tapping a cigar against a crystal ashtray. 3 men sat across from him, their faces hidden in shadow, but Desmond knew the type. Powerful, protected. The kind of men who saw human lives as currency. Whitaker smirked as Desmond entered. "You're late." Desmond closed the door behind him. "Didn't realize I was invited." Whitaker chuckled, swirling his drink. "Everyone's invited to the game, Desmond. It's just a matter of what piece you play." Desmond pulled out a chair, sitting across from him. He didn't recognize the other men, but their silence was calculated. They weren't Whitaker's lackeys, they were bigger. Whitaker leaned forward. "You've been making a lot of noise." Desmond didn't respond. He was listening. Waiting. Whitaker sighed, setting his drink down. "See, the problem with men like you think justice is some noble concept. It's not. It's a currency. And right now, you're bankrupt." Desmond smiled coldly. "Funny. That's what they said about Mullet Carter before they executed him in an alley." The room tensed. One of the men shifted slightly. A tell. Whitaker's smirk remained, but his eyes hardened. "You don't know when to stop, do you?" Desmond leaned forward. "You're right. I don't." Whitaker chuckled again, shaking his head. "You think you're a threat to me? To them?" He gestured toward the 2 silent men. "You're a footnote. You're a distraction, and distractions get eliminated." Desmond's pulse slowed. The real game was beginning. Whitaker nodded toward the door. And that's when Desmond heard it. Footsteps. Heavy, fast, coming straight for him. The trap had been set. Now he had to survive it. The door burst open before Desmond could react. 3 men stormed in, not security, not bodyguards, but enforcers. Their movements were sharp, rehearsed. These weren't men who merely stood at doorways looking tough. These were killers. Desmond barely had time to shift before the first one struck. A baton came swinging toward his ribs. He twisted, the strike grazing his side but failing to land cleanly. Before the man could swing again, Desmond grabbed his wrist, twisting it violently. Crack. The man howled in pain as his wrist snapped. Desmond didn't stop. He yanked him forward, slamming his elbow into his jaw, knocking him out cold before he hit the floor. The second man lunged, but Desmond had already calculated his next move. He sidestepped, dropped low, and swept his leg out, taking the attacker's legs out from under him. But the third man was already in motion. Desmond felt the punch before he saw it, a hammer-like blow that landed against his ribs. Pain exploded in his side. He staggered back, gasping as the enforcer drove his knee into Desmond's gut. Desmond's vision blurred. The room spun. Whitaker's laugh cut through the chaos. You really thought you could walk in here and make demands? Desmond's survival instincts kicked in. He grabbed a whiskey bottle from the table, spun, and smashed it across the enforcer's face. Glass shattered. Blood sprayed. The man fell, screaming. One left. Desmond turned, only to see the barrel of a gun aimed between his eyes. Whitaker stood behind it, calm as ever. Desmond froze, his chest heaving. The room was silent except for the muffled groans of the fallen men. Whitaker sighed, shaking his head. I was hoping you'd be smarter than this. Desmond clenched his jaw. I didn't come here to die. Whitaker smirked. That's the problem with men like you. You never get a say in how it ends. Desmond's hands balled into fists, but he knew there was no fighting this one. Then a voice cut through the tension. I wouldn't do that if I were you, Whitaker. The room shifted. Whitaker turned. His expression changed for the first time that night. Surprise. Desmond followed his gaze. A man stood in the doorway, a pistol leveled at Whitaker's head. Taurus. But there was something different, something colder. Whitaker let out a short laugh. Well, this is unexpected. Taurus stepped forward, his gun unwavering. Desmond, you good? Desmond's instincts screamed at him. Something wasn't right. Whitaker leaned back, that smug expression returning. Let me guess, you're here to make a deal? Taurus didn't answer. Desmond took a slow step back, his mind racing. This wasn't a rescue. Taurus flicked his eyes toward him, and Desmond saw it. The tiniest hesitation. Betrayal. Whitaker chuckled. Ah, so this is the part where you switch sides. Desmond's stomach turned. Taurus didn't deny it. Desmond, Taurus said carefully, this doesn't have to end messy. Whitaker's grin widened. It's not personal, kid. It's business. Desmond felt the walls closing in. Taurus still had the gun trained on Whitaker, but Desmond knew the truth. The gun wasn't meant for Whitaker. It was meant for him. And the real game had just begun. Desmond's breath was steady, but his mind was a storm of rage and calculation. Taurus still had his gun trained on Whitaker, but Desmond knew the truth was written in his stance. This wasn't a rescue. This was a trap. Lower the gun, Taurus, Desmond said, his voice deadly calm. Taurus didn't move. Whitaker, ever the master manipulator, smiled. I have to say, I didn't expect you to sell him out so easily, Taurus. But then again, everyone has a price. Desmond felt the weight of those words like a hammer to the chest. Taurus had been his brother in arms, the only one who knew the real war Desmond had been fighting. They had bled together, risked everything together, and now here they were. Desmond's hands twitched, his mind racing. The odds were against him. 3 down, but Whitaker was still standing. And Taurus had betrayed him. Don't do this, Desmond said. His voice was firm, but there was something underneath it. One last thread of hope. Taurus finally turned his head slightly toward Desmond. The look in his eyes was unreadable. Walk away, Taurus said. Desmond almost laughed. Walk away? After everything? He wasn't sure what hurt more, the fact that Taurus was pointing a gun at him, or the fact that there was no hesitation in his voice. You knew, Desmond murmured. The realization hit him like a gut punch. You knew what was happening all along. Taurus stayed silent. Whitaker sighed, shaking his head in amusement. Look at you, still trying to appeal to loyalty. He turned to Taurus. You made the right choice, son. We both know what happens to people who stand in his way. Desmond's blood boiled at those words. Whitaker had been destroying lives for years, crushing anyone who refused to kneel. And Taurus was kneeling. Desmond clenched his fists. How much did he pay you? Taurus finally met his eyes, and for a split second, Desmond saw it. Guilt, but just as quickly, it was gone. Taurus's grip tightened on the gun. It's not like that. Then tell me what it's like, Desmond shot back. Whitaker clapped his hands together, his patience wearing thin. This has been fun, boys, but I'm afraid we have a schedule to keep. That was all the warning Desmond got. Taurus moved. Fast. Desmond saw it before it happened. The subtle shift in Taurus's balance, the way his index finger twitched ever so slightly. Taurus was about to pull the trigger. Desmond exploded into motion. His body reacted on instinct. Years of training kicking in before his mind could even catch up. He dove to the side as Taurus fired. The bullet tore through the air where Desmond's head had been a split second earlier. Desmond hit the ground, rolled, and came up swinging. Taurus barely had time to react before Desmond drove his elbow into his ribs. The gun went off again, the shot going wild. Whitaker was already moving, pulling his own weapon. Desmond didn't give him the chance. He snatched a fallen baton from the floor, spun, and cracked it across Torres's wrist. The gun fell from his grasp. Torres stumbled back, pain flashing across his face, but Desmond didn't stop. He grabbed Torres by the collar, yanked him forward, and slammed his forehead into Torres's nose. Blood sprayed. Torres collapsed to the ground, gasping. Desmond turned, just in time to see Whitaker raising his weapon. He had one shot. Desmond hurled the baton like a spear. It struck Whitaker's wrist with perfect precision. The gun jerked upward, the shot going high. Desmond was on him in an instant. He grabbed Whitaker's arm, twisted it behind his back, and slammed him face first into the table. Glass shattered. Whitaker let out a choked cry, but Desmond didn't let up. This man, this monster, had taken everything from him. The temptation to end it right there was overwhelming. But Desmond took a slow breath. He was not Whitaker. He leaned in close, his voice a whisper of cold fury. "You should have killed me when you had the chance." Then he slammed Whitaker's head against the table one last time. Silence. Whitaker went limp. Desmond turned to Torres, who was struggling to sit up, his face a bloody mess. "You should have stood with me," Desmond said, his voice quiet but firm. Torres didn't say a word. Desmond stepped over him, grabbed the fallen gun, and walked out. The war wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Desmond moved like a shadow through the dimly lit corridors, his steps silent, his grip firm on the stolen gun. Every breath was calculated, every movement precise. The walls around him felt like they were closing in, not from fear, but from the weight of what had just happened. Torres had betrayed him. Whitaker was down, but not dead, and now Desmond was a marked man. Outside, the night stretched into infinity, the city's skyline a blur of neon and darkness. The air was thick with tension, the kind that settled deep into the bones. They would come for him. That much was certain. He wasn't just fighting a corrupt system anymore. He was at war with the entire machine. As he made his way toward an exit, his mind raced through every possible scenario. Whitaker had connections in high places. Men who would do anything to bury this story before it ever reached the public. Desmond was a loose end. And in their world, loose ends didn't survive. He needed to disappear. A city that eats its own number. The moment Desmond stepped outside, he knew he had mere minutes before the alarms were raised. The city was alive, but to him, it was a battlefield. Every shadow a potential threat, every bystander a possible enemy. He pulled up the hood of his jacket and walked with purpose, blending into the chaos. Years of survival instincts kicked in. Stay in the open, but not too exposed. Move with the flow of the crowd, but don't linger. Eyes up, but never meet a gaze too long. The streets smelled of gasoline and rain, the pavement slick under his boots. A voice buzzed in his earpiece. "Are you clear?" It was Logan, one of the last people Desmond could still trust. "For now," Desmond muttered, "but it won't last. I'm tracking your location. You've got multiple heat signatures moving in. They must have already put out a call." Of course they had. Whitaker wasn't the type to let a loose end walk away. Desmond turned down a side street, ducking into the shadows between two buildings. The moment his back hit the cold brick wall, he exhaled sharply. This wasn't just about survival. This was about finishing it. The price of truth. Logan's voice cut through the static again. "You need an exit. Fast." Desmond wiped a hand down his face, feeling the dried blood on his skin. "Where's my closest safe house?" There was a brief silence, followed by Logan's reply. "Nowhere close enough. Whitaker's reach is everywhere." Desmond closed his eyes for half a second, letting the truth sink in. The game had changed. No more hiding, no more running. If Whitaker wanted a war, Desmond would bring it to his doorstep. "Forget safe houses," he said. "I need a weapon drop." Logan hesitated. "You sure? You're already public enemy number one." Desmond smirked grimly. "Then let's give them something to be afraid of." The city hummed with an unsettling quiet. Somewhere, a siren wailed, distant yet sharp, slicing through the air like a blade. Desmond knew the hunt was on. He pressed his back against the cold brick of a back alley, inhaling the metallic scent of rain and exhaust. His hoodie was damp, his fingers tense around the stolen gun. Everything felt heavy, but he wasn't about to break. Not now. Not ever. The world thought it had him cornered, but Desmond wasn't just another pawn in their game. He was a storm they didn't see coming. A war without mercy. "Logan," he whispered into his earpiece. Talk to me. Logan's voice crackled through the static. I've got eyes on 4 units. 2 marked, 2 unmarked. They're circling a 5-block radius. You're inside their net. Desmond cursed under his breath. He had expected them to come after him, but this was fast. Too fast. They must have pre-planned this, he muttered. Taurus set me up perfectly. Logan hesitated. Yeah, and there's something else. Desmond's jaw tightened. Spit it out. They just released an APB on you. Charges include assaulting an officer, resisting arrest, and attempted murder. Lies. All of it. But in this city, truth didn't matter. Only power did. Desmond exhaled slowly, his pulse steady despite the rage burning inside him. How long before every cop in this city is gunning for me? Too late, they already are. Fighting ghosts, Desmond moved, not running. Runners get noticed. Instead, he walked with the kind of confidence that made people look past him. No sudden movements, no hesitation. He slipped between the crowds, head down, hands in his pockets. The police scanner on his earpiece buzzed. They were closing in. Suspect last seen heading east on Lenox Avenue. Negative, we're covering Lenox. Sweep north. Good, they had nothing concrete yet. Desmond cut into a dimly lit bodega, the kind where no one asked questions. The old man behind the counter barely looked up as Desmond moved toward the back, passing rows of canned goods and cheap cigarettes. Logan's voice broke through again. I dropped a package 2 blocks west. It's in a dumpster behind the laundromat. Black bag, red zip tie. Desmond checked the mirror near the fridge section. No tails. Got it, he said, slipping out the back door. The rain had started again, light but steady, coating the asphalt in a slick sheen. He moved fast, cutting through alleys and side streets until he reached the laundromat. There, the dumpster sat beneath a flickering street lamp, half covered in graffiti. Desmond pulled the black bag from inside, yanking it open just enough to see what Logan had left him. A suppressed Glock, a burner phone, a fresh set of clothes, and a flash drive. Desmond's pulse quickened. Logan, what's on the drive? Silence. Then Logan spoke, his voice lower now. Proof? Desmond's breath caught in his throat. Everything we need to burn Whitaker and Taurus to the ground. The cost of revenge. Desmond gripped the flash drive, feeling the weight of it in his palm. This was it. This was the thing men like Whitaker killed for. The thing that could turn him from a fugitive into the most dangerous man in the city. But getting it out wouldn't be easy. And the price? It could cost him everything. Desmond stuffed the bag under his hoodie and turned into the night. The hunt wasn't just for him anymore. Now, it was his turn to hunt. Desmond sat on the rooftop of an abandoned warehouse, the city's neon lights flickering below like dying embers. The flash drive felt like a live grenade in his pocket. If what Logan said was true, this wasn't just evidence. It was a declaration of war. He plugged the drive into the burner laptop Logan had provided. The screen blinked to life, revealing folders labeled with cryptic names. Project Revenant, Blackline Operations, Omega Clearance. Desmond's gut tightened. This wasn't just police corruption. This was bigger. Way bigger. A government cover-up. Logan's voice crackled through Desmond's earpiece. All right, you seeing this? Desmond's fingers hovered over the keyboard. Yeah, and I don't like it. These files aren't just about Whitaker and Taurus. They connect the police force to something way beyond street-level corruption. Desmond clicked on the Project Revenant file first. Inside were classified memos, black-budget transactions, and redacted documents with one name standing out repeatedly. Senator Richard Halliday. Desmond exhaled sharply. Logan, what the hell is a U.S. senator doing in this mess? Logan sighed. It's worse than we thought. Halliday has been funding a secret program through the police department, targeting people like you. Desmond's jaw tightened. Like me? Logan hesitated before answering. People who ask the wrong questions. People who won't stay quiet. They're making sure men like Whitaker and Taurus have full immunity to do whatever they want. Desmond clenched his fists. Every injustice he had suffered wasn't a random act. It was part of a system. A system designed to break people like him. The price of truth. His mind raced. This wasn't just about clearing his name anymore. This was about exposing a machine built to silence, control, and erase anyone who stepped out of line. But if he released this, if he went public, they wouldn't just try to arrest him. They'd kill him. Desmond knew the rules of this game. The moment he pressed upload, he wouldn't just be a fugitive, he'd be the most wanted man in the country. A betrayal in the dark. Before he could decide, a noise cut through the night, footsteps on gravel. Desmond's instincts screamed. He grabbed the Glock from his waistband, pressing himself against the rooftop wall. Then, a voice, calm, familiar. "Desmond, put the gun down." He turned, and his heart nearly stopped. Logan stood there, but he wasn't alone. Behind him, 3 men in tactical gear, their weapons aimed directly at Desmond's chest. Desmond's stomach dropped. This wasn't an ambush. It was a setup. Desmond's pulse pounded like war drums in his ears. His grip tightened around the Glock, but he didn't raise it. Not yet. Logan stood motionless, his hands up, but his eyes told a different story. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't warning Desmond. He was stalling. "Put the gun down," Logan repeated. Desmond swallowed the rising bile in his throat. "Tell me this ain't what it looks like." Logan's lips pressed into a thin line. "It's exactly what it looks like." The 3 men behind him stepped forward. Their body language screamed military training. Desmond's stomach twisted. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was a carefully planned execution. The deal with the devil. Desmond exhaled slowly. "You sold me out." Logan didn't blink. "I didn't have a choice." Desmond let out a bitter laugh. "That's what cowards say." A flicker of something, regret, shame, crossed Logan's face, but it was gone before Desmond could be sure. "You don't get it," Logan said. "This goes all the way up, man. Halliday owns everything. Police, courts, even the feds. There's nowhere left to run." Desmond took a slow step backward, keeping the gun low but ready. "So what? You decided to join the winning side?" Logan's jaw tightened. "I decided to survive." The leader of the tactical team, a man with cold, dead eyes, cut in. "Enough talking. Drop the gun, or we drop you." Desmond calculated his odds. 3 against 1. They were better armed, better positioned. But they had underestimated one thing. Desmond had already made peace with dying. No more running. Desmond moved first. His fingers squeezed the trigger before they could react, the bullet tearing through the closest man's throat. The second raised his rifle, but Desmond was already diving, rolling into cover as a barrage of gunfire ripped through the rooftop. Sparks flew, concrete shattered. Logan shouted, "Hold your fire, we need him alive!" But Desmond knew better. They weren't here to arrest him. They were here to make sure he disappeared. The wrath of a cornered man. He fired twice more. One shot hitting center mass, dropping the second man. The third went wide, barely grazing the last soldier's arm. Desmond pivoted, just in time to see Logan raising his weapon. Their eyes met. A silent conversation, a lifetime of history in a single glance. Then Logan hesitated. Desmond didn't. He pulled the trigger. The bullet tore through Logan's shoulder, spinning him to the ground. For a split second, Desmond felt nothing. No anger, no regret, just clarity. This was the cost of betrayal. And this wasn't over yet. The rooftop smelled of gunpowder and blood. Desmond's breath came in sharp, controlled bursts as he scanned the bodies around him. 2 men dead. Logan down but still breathing. The last soldier, the one Desmond had only grazed, was somewhere in the shadows. Desmond knew better than to stand still. A wounded enemy was the most dangerous kind. Logan groaned, trying to push himself up. You didn't have to shoot me." Desmond ignored him. His focus was on the faint scrape of boots against concrete. The last man was repositioning. Survival over mercy. Desmond moved fast, ducking behind a rusted air vent. A shot rang out. It missed by inches. The soldier had fired blind, hoping to force Desmond into the open. Too bad for him. Desmond didn't scare easy. He swung wide, emerging from cover low and fast. 2 shots. One hit the soldier's knee, dropping him instantly. The other hit his weapon, sending it skidding across the rooftop. Desmond was on him before he could recover, pressing a boot against his chest and aiming the Glock at his head. "Who sent you?" The man spat blood. "You already know." Desmond ground his boot in deeper. "Say it anyway." "Halliday," the soldier choked. "He knew you'd come after him. He sent us to finish it." Desmond exhaled slowly. Halliday wasn't just reacting anymore. He was setting traps. Which meant he was afraid, and fear made people sloppy. The last conversation between brothers, Desmond turned to Logan, who was watching him with a strange look. Desmond had seen that expression before. Regret. Logan coughed, clutching his bleeding shoulder. "You should have just walked away, man. You can't win this." Desmond crouched beside him. "You sound like a man trying to convince himself." Logan let out a humorless laugh. "You think I wanted this? Halliday owns me, Des. He owns everyone. He's untouchable. Desmond studied him. No one's untouchable. Logan shook his head. You still don't get it. This isn't a fight you can win with bullets. Desmond frowned. Then how did Halliday get so much power? A terrible thought settled in his mind. Tell me what you know. Logan hesitated. Then finally, he whispered, it's not just Halliday, it's bigger than him. The whole system is rigged. Desmond clenched his jaw. He'd suspected as much, but hearing it, that was different. He stood, his mind already racing ahead. The plan had to change. This wasn't just about Halliday anymore. It was about exposing everything. The escape, a helicopter's distant thrum sent adrenaline spiking through Desmond's veins. Backup was coming. He had minutes, maybe seconds, before the rooftop swarmed with more men. Desmond turned back to Logan. You coming with me? Logan's jaw tensed. I can't. Desmond nodded once, then stay out of my way. He turned and ran. The rooftop door wasn't an option. It would be swarming with Halliday's men. That left one choice. Desmond sprinted toward the edge of the building, 15 feet away. Gunfire erupted behind him. 10 feet. Bullets whizzed past his head, 5 feet. Desmond launched himself into the air. For a terrifying moment, there was nothing, just open sky. Then, impact. He rolled onto the rooftop of the next building, breathless but alive. And just like that, Desmond was gone. Desmond hit the ground running, his body sore from the jump, but his mind sharper than ever. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was bigger, darker, more insidious than he had ever imagined. Halliday was only a symptom. The disease was the system itself. And now Desmond had a choice, the final call. He moved quickly through the back alleys, his mind racing. There was one last person he needed to call, someone who could bring everything into the light. He pulled out a burner phone and dialed. A familiar voice answered. I was wondering when you'd finally reach out. Desmond exhaled. I have everything, names, dates, transactions, locations, but I need a way to get it out before they bury it. A pause. Then, meet me in 20 minutes. But understand this, Desmond, once we do this, there's no going back. Desmond almost laughed. Going back? That had never been an option. One shot at redemption. 20 minutes later, he sat in the passenger seat of a black sedan, handing over a flash drive. His contact, an independent journalist, plugged it in and stared at the screen in horror. This? She shook her head. This isn't just corruption. This is war crimes. Desmond looked away. He already knew. The files weren't just about Halliday's empire. They contained evidence of years of cover-ups, assassinations, government contracts shielding cartels, and money laundering at the highest levels. Everything Logan had hinted at, it was all true. The journalist swallowed hard. This is going to change everything. Desmond met her eyes. That's the point. The reckoning. Within 48 hours, the world erupted. News channels, independent media, whistleblower organizations, all of them exploded with the leaks. Headlines screamed betrayal. Government cover-up exposed. Halliday's empire falls. A nation in outrage. Demands for justice rise. It didn't take long before arrests began. Halliday's name was dragged through the mud, his empire burning from the inside out. Some of his allies fled the country. Others turned on each other, scrambling to cut deals before their heads rolled. But Desmond? He had disappeared. The legend lives on. Rumors spread. Some said Desmond had died in the fight. Some said he was still out there, watching, waiting for the next corrupt king to rise, ready to strike them down just the same. And in certain circles, his name became a warning, a whisper in the dark. Be careful who you betray, because some ghosts never stay buried. The world had changed. But the war? It was far from over. And Desmond knew he would always be needed. Final words, this was never just about revenge. It was about justice. About proving that even in a broken system, the truth still mattered. That no matter how powerful they were, they could still be brought to their knees. Because in the end, there's one thing more powerful than fear. Wrath. The wrath of the forgotten.
Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please support me by clicking the logo in the bottom right corner to subscribe to my channel. This way you won't miss any of the exciting stories coming up. Thank you so much.